We don't have all of our presenters here yet, but let's get the meeting started and we can get through some of the early stuff. So welcome to the December meeting of the North End Neighborhood Council, our last meeting of the year. I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving and looking forward to Christmas. You've seen the agenda. We've got two great presentations for you all tonight. So I think that's going to try and get through the other business quite quickly. Under announcements, our secretary, Alex, has had to resign because due to his business commitments, he now has meetings on a Monday night, so he's unable to come. So fortunately, our newest board member, Bonnie O'Leary, has stepped up and has agreed to be our secretary. So we do have a full slate of officers ready for 2025. We still have several open board positions. So anybody who would be interested in joining the board, please reach out to me or any of the other board members. We have a board meeting coming up next week, and we like to have potential board meetings come to a board meeting so they can sort of see us in action and work out what's happening. So if anybody's interested, just reach out. You can either go into any of those NENC email addresses or reach out to me directly. We've also been working on our topics for the 2025, and I will be sending a message out to everybody on our mailing list, which I believe is most of you, looking for input. We've already received one unsolicited suggestion of getting a presentation on recycling and garbage pickup, which we thought was good. We've already got we've got the city budget lined up for the January meeting, and we've got John Hines coming in February to talk about, he made some amendments to the Home in Tacoma proposal that we'll probably hear about later on moving the trees out of the Home in Tacoma. So he's going to come and explain what that means and how they're going to enhance the tree canopy. We're going to hold minutes and treasurer's report for this meeting. So I don't see any police in the room. So I think, Christina, if I could have you come up and give the city manager's report. I did get a message from council member Sarah Rumbow that her daughter has a conflict, so she wasn't going to be here. Is John going to be here?
He's walking in right now.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Peter. Hi, everyone. The incentives look so festive. That's lovely. I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving and just a great time with your friends and families and loved ones. I just have a few things to flag for you tonight. So let's see, I will start off with a couple of open positions that have come up for our volunteer committee boards and commissions. So we have an open position on our commission for immigrant and refugee issues. And we also have open positions on our community police advisory committee. So these are volunteer positions. But they're a great way to get involved in particular topics going on in the city. And those applications, the immigrant and refugee issues closes on December 15th, and the Community and Police Advisory Committee is taking applications until the positions are filled. And you can find more information and the applications for those at cityoftacoma.org. /CBC applications. And then I also just wanted to make sure you are all tracking a very fun event coming up this weekend. The Arts at the Armory is taking place. And so that is going to be 11 to 5 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday. There's going to be over 100 local artists there showcasing all of their work. So lots of great artists to meet and get to know, and some fun, unique pieces of art to purchase if you're interested. So that'll be a great event. And then I know Deputy Mayor Hines will share more about his upcoming town hall, but Councilmember Rumba is also having her town hall taking place this Wednesday. So you can find more information about that as well on our website, and happy to answer any questions from anyone. Yeah, here's Deputy Mayor.
And let you get off easy.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys.
John walked in the room just in time to be invited up. So I'd like to invite Deputy Mayor John Hines, who's also our District 1 representative. And you probably already heard, Sarah said she couldn't come.
She could not come, yes.
The general update, Peter, or?
Whatever you want to talk about.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. Thanks again for having me here at the Northern Neighborhood Council meeting. Happy holidays, everyone. We're getting close to the holiday season, so hopefully everybody had a good Thanksgiving. Couple updates. I'm sure it's part of the evening tonight. I think we are talking about home in Tacoma, are we not? We are. So that was voted on by the council on November, what date again? 19th, approved by council on November 19th. So there'll be some conversation around that. It was a process that took, I mean, I think almost every day I've been on the council, we've been talking about home in Tacoma. So here we are. I've been reelected once, so we're almost 5 years into that. It was finally completed on the 19th, and we'll see kind of how it moves forward from here. Again, lots of process, a lot of pieces moving forward, and we'll continue to refine. One thing that did get pulled out of the home Tacoma process, which I'm sure people have questions for me, is the tree conversation, some of the tree preservation pieces of home in Tacoma. And my point I made at the time when I made that change was that home in Tacoma just applies to our residential properties here in our city. It doesn't apply to every property. And so the tree preservation conversation and trees in general is a conversation that needs to apply to more than just residential properties. We need to talk about commercial properties, industrial properties, open space, and all the properties in our city. And so that conversation felt more appropriate to happen on its own. We have time and space where to talk specifically about trees and what the future of trees look like in the city of Tacoma. So that was November 19th. Very excited for that to be completed, and I'm happy to answer questions about that. More personally to myself, on this Saturday, I have a senior summit coming up at the Alicio Lutheran Center on 1300 North Highland Street. The goal of that conversation is to talk simply about the age-friendly city action plan the city updated or adopted in 2021. It's led by Councilmember Lillian Hunter. We haven't really re-examined it for the last 4 years, so I'll be bringing that back forward and looking about the aspects of our city and how we can be more age-friendly. Comment I heard the other day is we're soon going to be a city where the number of people over the age of 50 are going to outnumber the people under the age of 5. So, you know, when you start thinking about that, we think about all that we invest in schools and parks, playgrounds and things like that. We make those investments because we have young people in our community. But if our community is going to be more predominantly people over the age of 50, it requires us to really think about how we design a city for that. So that will be the senior summit. It is December 7th, which is a Saturday. It will hopefully not be a date which will live in infamy. For those of you that are history majors will know what I mean when I say that. And it's from 10 a.m. till noon. There we go. Christina will be there with me. Tomorrow is the first reading of the city's biennial operating budget. We operate on a 2-year budget cycle. So our budget hearing, our first budget meeting, not hearing, sorry, we had our hearing 2 weeks ago. Our first budget meeting will be, reading of the budget will be tomorrow. There'll be a chance for public comment if people would like to weigh in on the budget. I'm also happy to talk about budget conversations here today. The biggest part of the conversation has been the fire budget. As part of that, we put a operating levy on the ballot for fire services this November. It did not pass. And so that has some downstream effects on the overall budget of the city of Tacoma. And we have to make some clear choices about what are the priorities in the budget where we don't have additional revenues coming in. So as part of that conversation tomorrow, we'll be talking about our proposed budget, and there may or may not be some amendments to the budget to try to accomplish covering some of the fire services that have been proposed to be cut. So, 2, 3. Those are the big three. I know the assessor's here to talk about multifamily tax exemption, which I'm also happy to talk about too. I would just, before he gets up here, I would say that the city is looking at the multifamily tax exemption through my committee, the Government Performance and Finance Committee, over the rest early next year, and just looking at kind of what potential changes we would like to make to it. In 2021, we made some changes to the multifamily tax exemption, so we removed the 8-year tax exemption from Proctor and Point Ruston. So that's remember the 8-year is the one that has no affordability requirements. The 12-year has some affordability requirements, and the 20-year has even more. We've yet to have anybody take us up on that one in the city of Tacoma. But we'll be looking at the tax exemptions here over the next year and thinking about what potential changes we'd like to make to it. Whether that means getting rid of the 8-year in more places, whether that means making changes to the 12-year, what requirements we have for affordability, all our topics of conversation that we're gonna have. There we go. All right, I'll take a couple questions, but then we're gonna get a little too, I don't want to eat up too much of everybody else's time, so we'll go. Joe?
Is there anything obligatory that does the city have to give anyone a multifamily tax exemption?
No, I mean,
Repeat the question for the.
yeah, Joe asked, is there anything that obligates the city to give the multifamily tax exemption? It's currently in our code, so that's the only thing that it obligates right now. It's authorized by state law, but if the city decided that they did not want to give multifamily tax exemptions again in the future, they could make that decision. We could also decide what is required to give a multifamily tax exemption, so different levels of affordability, different kinds of public benefits. That's all within the city's purview. If we were going to go down that road, I would probably talk more about the benefits of housing versus no housing as part of that conversation. But yeah, yes.
When will the three conversations start?
We're going to be back here on February 3rd, the North End Neighborhood Council meeting, to talk about the committee process. It's going to be going to IPS. So Christina Walker, myself, Councilor Diaz, Councilor Logio, begin that conversation. The goal is to get it started in January. I don't know, Brian, if we've talked about the agenda yet about where we're going to happen, but the goal is to get it started this quarter and very soon, because it's a hot topic that people are very interested in us getting that conversation started and going. But we will be back here in February to talk to the North Neighborhood Council about that. Good.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
We let you off easy tonight. Are you running away or are you going?
I'm gonna stick around. We should do comments.
Good, because so you may have some questions out of the next presentation. So I'm very pleased to welcome our Pierce County Assessor Treasurer Mike Lonergan, who's going to speak to us about the John's already stolen my thunder about the multifamily tax exemption process. Mike's reaching the end of 8-year term? 12-year term, but he's also a North End resident. So we're very pleased to welcome you. And the microphone is yours. We have some people on the Zoom, so we may get some questions that we'll monitor through there. And if you could, this is what they're seeing, so I can adjust it.
Who's that ugly man in the middle? I'm gonna hand you something, if you don't mind, that we can pass out. And I will come to this a little bit later, not right at the start here, but the deputy mayor kind of set the stage here. And some of you do have higher levels of knowledge by far than others, and probably even more than me, about the multifamily tax exemption. 8 years and 12 years was mentioned, affordable housing was mentioned, it all fits in there, but it is as a result, as he said, of the state legislature's action a number of years ago, and then more recent changes, additions that have been made to the multifamily tax exemption. I'll just say at the outset, of course, why do we have taxes, property taxes specifically, to fund the various functions of government at all levels. In the case of the property tax, and as you'll see, as you look at what I'm handing out and talk about in a minute or two, schools are the primary purpose. We have property taxes. But as was mentioned with the levy that was unsuccessful for the fire department for the city, fire protection is another major recipient funded separately from the city in the rural areas, but part of city government here in the cities. And that's the main reason we have property taxes and other taxes. I collect every year for all the levels of government, now right at $2 billion in Pierce County. And that to me is a huge number. You hear it every day in the federal government, but tens of billions here and there. But $2 billion from us for one specific tax, to me, is a heck of a lot of money. But there is another aspect to taxation, and that is where the exemptions come in. Sometimes the government chooses to encourage certain actions. So we've had long-standing tax exemptions for charitable nonprofit organizations, uh, churches and synagogues. I used to, of course, run the Tacoma Rescue Mission. It was a great benefit to us not to use donors' money to turn around and pay taxes. So that exists. You may or may not know, living in the city, that we also have a pretty attractive exemption offered to farmers and to those who are growing trees for harvest. They end up, the tree growers end up paying a big excise tax when they harvest the trees, but for the decades that they're growing, they get quite a tax rate. And the farmers, as long as it's people actually working to keep farming alive and make a profit in most years doing it, then they can qualify for that exemption too. But then along came another desire of the legislature, and here's the intent page from RCW 8414. The legislature finds that many Washington urban centers have insufficient availability of desirable and convenient residential units. The development of additional and desirable residential units, including affordable housing, is desired and mandated by the Growth Management Act. The planning solutions to solve the problems of urban sprawl often lack incentive needed to encourage residential development. Therefore, the legislature intends to achieve multiple goals by incentivizing development of multi-unit housing, including creating additional affordable housing, encouraging urban development and density, increasing market rate workforce housing, developing permanently affordable housing opportunities, promoting economic investment and recovery, and creating family wage jobs. So those were the reasons they said that they came up with this idea. Again, quite a number of years ago. First legislation was in 1995, but as I say, it's been also updated several times, including very recently, offering those 20-year exemptions with a number of strings attached. One very interesting thing is, to my knowledge, the city of Seattle has never granted anything other than affordable housing multifamily exemptions. They said, you need to do that paperwork to keep track of who lives there and what their income is in order to qualify for the 12-year exemption. And now there are some sweeter further exemptions being proposed or granted, but they never went with the 8-year without any requirement for affordable housing, because their goal was to find some affordable housing in a place that is very expensive to live, more expensive to live than in Pierce County. So that's what I understand. The definitions come into play there. Below 80% of the median household income, and spending, that is the low income definition, spending less than 30% of your income on housing is another definition for affordable housing. Now, the big issue that comes into play with this and the other measures that I mentioned about agricultural exemptions and nonprofit and so forth is a tax shift. The way that the council members and the school board members and so forth are able to calculate what they can collect in a given year without going to a vote of the people is 1% more than they collected in the highest previous year. Usually that's the immediate previous year, but sometimes it even goes back farther than that. Not every city or taxing district automatically takes the 1%. Some are proud not to take the 1%. They bank it for a lean time that may come up in the future. And I just read the other day in one of the other counties that there's a city that had not taken the 1% for several years. Then when inflation hits, they reached back and said, oh, we're going to now raise it 4%. in 1 year because we don't have to stick to the 1% increase if we didn't take it in at least 3 previous years, if you follow what I'm saying. So that is an important consideration. When we exempt someone partially or fully, the nonprofit organizations and churches, that is a full exemption. They only pay very minimal fees and no property tax at all on their tax bill. And others get the partial exemption. They have a current use exemption for farming. What is the value of their land as farming, not as turning it into a big subdivision, which is tempting, but if you want the exemption, you can't do that. And the same with the timber, and also there's open space. One of the goals of government is to not have everything paved, everything developed. So if you can make the case, and they use a point system at the county, not in my department, but in the planning department, to show that you qualify for an open space partial exemption. So there's different kinds of exemptions, as I say, but to get back to the point, they wanted to increase residential opportunities, including affordable housing in cities that are required to plan, where the governing authority, the city council, has found there is insufficient housing opportunity, and to stimulate the construction of new multifamily housing and rehabilitation of existing vacant or underutilized housing. And they talk in terms of, they use the term efficient urban centers. The city council years ago, when they made some adjustments, but they picked areas of the city where they felt there should be more concentrated development. And in recent years also, proximity to transit has become a bigger issue in making those kinds of decisions. But there is the 8-year without needing to do anything as far as affordable housing. You can charge market rate, but you still do not pay most of your property taxes for 8 years. And what does that mean? I'll just jump ahead here. I didn't ask how much time I should take, but I see there's a lot on the agenda tonight. So I'm not gonna spend all my time on this one topic, but I can take questions. But some of you know I live right next door to, I used to live next door to a house. And then next to that was a small business. And then next to that was the Proctor Post Office. Now I live next door to a 6-story building that is 10 feet away from my bedroom window. And it houses 95 units. So I just thought that would be a good example of what we're doing when we do this. We value, as you know, the assessor's job is to value every single property in the county. We do it on a 6-year cycle. So this year we're doing Northeast Tacoma out to 5 Sumner, Puyallup, that part of the county. But 2 years ago, we did all of the Tacoma area here. Last year it was Lakewood and Stillicum and so forth. So on a 6-year cycle, we look at every single property for changes, for condition and so forth. And then we also value, we do all that during the fall, winter, spring, and in the summer, we go out and value all new construction that's underway. So we place a value on all these properties. And for the what's called Proctor Flats, the place that was built next to me, it's also called Proctor 3 because it was the third of the large apartment buildings that were built in the Proctor area. So the sheets you have shown at the top there that there is a tax rate in Pierce County, in Tacoma, excuse me, specifically Tacoma, of $11.11. And you can see how we arrive at that by combining all the taxes that you would pay. So I'll talk about that for a minute before talking specifically about the tax shift that can be created by these exemptions. The biggest number, if you look down toward the bottom, local schools and the state of Washington, $4.16 for the Tacoma School District. That would be the combination of any levies and bond issues that have been voted by the people. Then the $2.31 to the state of Washington is all for education. So, when you add those two together, the 37.5% and the almost 21%, it is over 58% of your property tax is going for schools. And then, the city, much talked about here, the city gets about 20 cents on the dollar of your property tax. Back when I was on the council, and I'm sure John and others get these calls, look, I pay thousands of dollars in property tax every year. All I want is a street light in front of my house. Is that too much to ask? I've been paying this for decades. Well, yeah, but the city only got 20% of the property tax. And out of that, of course, is providing police, fire, streets, and so forth. So there isn't that much going to that one area. The primary area, well over half, is the school system. The other big one here in Pierce County, or in Tacoma, excuse me, I keep saying Pierce County, but I mean Tacoma, is Metro Parks. Tacoma Metro Parks just passed a couple years ago, a pretty good sized levy on top of others they've had in the past. And we have a great park system, but again, it is costly. That's 11% of the taxes you pay, $1.22 per $1,000 value. And then you see that the port and the flood control district, which are county-wide districts, everybody in the county pays, and that's about 1% each. And then the county itself gets the county tax plus the conservation futures tax, which is to preserve rural properties, 7% of your total if you put those two together. If you live out in the county, you do not pay a city tax if you're in the unincorporated areas, but you pay a sizable county roads tax instead of that, and that is used to maintain all the county roads. So that's the story, and you can see where your taxes go. And one other thing to point out at the bottom of that sheet is the voter approved tax, which would be not only the school levies and bond issues, but also things like Metro Parks, or had the fire levy passed, those things are voted tax, and about 46% of your tax is voted. And again, people say, I didn't vote for taxes. I never vote for taxes. No, but a majority of the people in that taxing district, whether it's the school district, the city, whatever, did vote for that. So having said that, I'll now give you a couple of numbers here. The total assessed value of the building next door to me, just using it as an example, is $22.5 million. We believe that it is worth, in today's market, $22,519,000. We then place a taxable value on it, and that is the value of the part before they built the apartments, the land under it, and then any part of the building that is not multifamily housing can be taxed. So anything that is not the exempt multifamily housing, and the value we place on that is rather shocking compared to the $22.5 million. It is $1.7 million. When you multiply that $1.7 million times the $11.11, which is the Tacoma tax rate this year, the tax paid by that 95 unit building is $19,200. That is equivalent to 2 or 3 of the houses represented in this room, depending, people have different values of their property, but it wouldn't be more than 3 of houses in the north end of Tacoma. What we do collect in tax is the same $11.11 times the $1.7 million value of the land, basically. And so the amount we're collecting, as I say, is $19,203. If we were collecting the tax on the full building, same way as you pay the tax on the full value of your land and building, the tax each year, instead of being $19,000, would be $250,000 and change. So that's the difference. And again, that goes for 8 years. At the end of 8 years, it does go on the tax rolls. We do continue, collecting the tax, and we collect the full amount at that time, which would be the number of 250,000 or whatever it is when the end of the 8 years comes. Unless, of course, they're now allowed now to switch and add some affordable housing, 20% affordable housing, and they can get a longer, the 20-year extension. So whether that would happen or not, whether it's feasible or not, in these various properties, I don't know, but they have opened the door for that as a further incentive. So that's the effect of it. We call it a tax shift because if you think about it, again, using this example, and there's 3 of them right in the Proctor neighborhood of approximately the same size, I think. Brian would probably know more exactly, but if there's 95 units next to me, and it's already happened that there's an emergency call there, the fire department, the 8 unit, will respond. I haven't seen any police activity there. We think about that with some apartment buildings, but this one has been, I haven't seen the police come there, but I did see the street department come recently. There are, I live on North 27th. They put the oil in the cracks, which saves the streets when the winter freeze comes. And so that's paid for by your taxes. I saw the street sweeper come by. This apartment I'm talking about it has the good fortune to be located 2 blocks away from a fire station. Most people are not anywhere near a fire station. It's 2 blocks away from the Tacoma Public Library. It only has so many branches, and there's a library right there. But all the people occupying that and those who own the building benefit from all of these services. But again, they're only paying the minimal amount of taxes during the 8 years. Again, it's about what the legislature's goals were, and then it's optional to cities whether they want to do this. But City of Tacoma chose to do it. And again, this debate was going on when I was on the city council, which is quite a few years ago now, but it's still going on. Should we be subsidizing other than affordable housing? Seattle chose not to. We have said we want to encourage development. And as you look like near the Tacoma Mall, you see there's been a lot of use in just a few areas of this measure. There are, I think there were 7 when I was there, maybe there's more now, other areas around town where there could be development, but it hasn't been as profitable or desirable, even with the tax break, to do it. So it hasn't happened in all the areas that the city desired that it happen. But that, in a nutshell, is what the exemption is and how it affects everybody. And some of the effects are good, and some, you could argue, are not so good. But it is achieving this goal under the Growth Management Act of densifying the cities, and now in the new legislation, more focus again on being near transit. The planning department, of course, has a big part to play in this too, because the biggest negative where I live, I might as well go ahead and say this if you don't know it already, but it's parking. 95 units, and the claim of the folks applying for the exemption and applying for the building permits and so forth was that most of the people there wouldn't have a car. In fact, they put in 95 bike racks. I have yet to see one bicycle come in or out of the building. I could be wrong about that. See a lot of people walking their dogs and a lot of activity, but I haven't seen any bicycles. But 45 units inside the building for parking for 95 occupancy units. Our street is jammed all the time. When one person pulls out, another pulls in. That's kind of the way it is. Safeway said, challenging for them because these people, not so much at the Proctor Flats, but another multifamily development with exemption, built very near Safeway, the people naturally started parking their parking lot, to the point I went there one day. I've been going to Safeway for 40 years. I thought, man, it must be really busy in there. I don't even know if I want to go, but I went in and it was not busy. It was normal or below normal. So they've had to hire someone to mark the tires of the cars out there to try to keep them from, parking overnight. But they're especially concerned about their own business operations. I would answer any questions people have, or do my best anyway.
So if I understand you correctly, in your reference to the fire department, that 95-unit building is paying a token towards police, fire, library, and all the other city services, and we're making up the difference, individual homeowners. Do you have any idea what the individual homeowner is paying in increased taxes to offset this over 8 years, $1,847,000 developer gets to keep?
I don't know.
We
Yes.
don't, the people on Zoom unfortunately can't hear.
Oh, I should repeat the question.
So can you please keep your questions really short?
Okay.
Because Mike will then have to repeat them.
Okay, so this question was, what is that tax shift if the occupants and owners of that building are receiving the benefit of all the city services for an 8-year period, in this case, what is the cost being shifted to the other taxpayers? I really can't answer that question. It probably could be calculated, but I don't know the answer. The one thing I know, just from talking to a state senator, a friend of mine, they're well aware whenever they pass something like this that is for the public good, that by incentivizing one, they are basically putting more of a burden on someone else. Yes.
My question is, which jurisdiction makes the determination of granting an MFTE? For example, if Tacoma grants an MFTE, does it not then mean that the city and other jurisdictions lose that fund, lose the money? So is there any correlation between Pierce County saying, whoa, 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 don't give away our taxes, but city of Tacoma gets to call it? So who determines?
Yes, in this case, it is the legislative body of the jurisdiction, so of the city. And there, even if I got deeper into this, there's provisions now for if you're in the urban growth area, but you can be in a rural area, and a county can grant an MFTE as well. But you're correct. Did I repeat the question? I don't think I did. Okay, so the question is, who makes the decision granting of the MFTEs? And it is the city council makes that decision. The legislature gave them the authority, but it's true that the taxes that are distributed, as you saw in your chart, are not distributed also to the school district and the port and so forth. Yes.
So the question, you said there was a 1% increase limit.
Yes.
So in this case, we had added a building worth 22.5 million,
Mhm.
but the 1% on the previous year had to cover those services. So we've actually got more people taking the services. Is that correct?
I would believe that is a correct statement. That's really the goal of this, is to densify certain designated areas of cities. And as I say, of some rural areas. So to repeat your question, I'm having trouble with this. I'm just saying, if cities can only increase without a vote of the people 1% a year, then this is growth. It's happening, not just these examples in Proctor, but it's happening in different parts of our city. I mentioned a lot a number of years ago, were built right near the Tacoma Mall. It's kind of where this started in Tacoma. And yes, I would say the city is having to stretch thinner because they have more calls for service than they had, and yet they're limited to the 1%. That's a whole other topic, by the way, but it's very interesting. Cities and counties are saying that 101% rule does not work for them in a time of inflation. If they're giving, for example, at the county, they gave a 4% raise to the county employees. And yet they only got 1% more than last year, plus whatever value of new construction we find in the summer when we go and look for it. And this is a growing county. Some counties, they have a token amount. Here, I've been adding every year about 1.5% to the budgets of the various cities and counties, just with the new construction on top of the 1%. So you could say there's roughly a 2.5% increase. Depends how much construction activity is in a given community, but we have been building a lot in Tacoma and throughout Pierce County. Yes.
Two quick questions, and I'll be really loud because I know how it feels. So, number one, any idea maybe instead of how many MFTE buildings in Tacoma are in existence at the moment? Because I can do the math later.
Boy, I don't know. I mean, it's been going on again since I was on the council like 15 to 20 years ago. John, do you know the answer to that? How many MFTEs are there in Tacoma is her question.
I mean, it's been around since 1997, so if you think about it, there are some that were built in 1997 that rolled off almost 20 years ago.
I just mean active.
Active, I can get you the list, I've seen it recently, I have a spreadsheet from.
So the deputy mayor is saying he doesn't know the number right now, but he can get it to you. And remember that after their 8 or 12 years was up, they've gone onto the tax rolls and then they are tax paying, at the full amount.
Perfect, we can figure. And the second one was, my real question is, and maybe, John, you know this as well, but my real interest is what led, and maybe we'll be involved in the rehash of this, like you said, John, but what led to this decision being made, especially when a city like Seattle said no? Why would Tacoma say yes? And why did they fall into this 8, 4, and then maybe 20 rules?
So I would defer to Assessor Lonergan, because he was on the council when they had these debates back in the 90s. Because I think there was a clear debate about the need for building to happen in the city of Tacoma back in the 90s that wasn't happening for about 20 years prior to that. So Mike, I'd let you probably answer that
Sure.
as best you can.
And again, people at home, the question was when and how was the decision to be made that we would grant the 8-year exemptions to those who were not providing any affordable housing, but market rate housing. I mean, this place next to me, they're like $1,400 a month to $2,000 a month. They charge about $200 more if you want to park your car under the building. So it is not in the definition of affordable that I mentioned earlier. I think almost every time this came up, I was one who was asking the question, do we want to keep doing this? We understand about the need for affordable housing, but do we want to keep simply encouraging this? And I guess what I'll say, just to be totally frank and transparent, there is lobbying for this by those who believe it can be profitable to build a building and pay minimal property taxes on it for a number of years. So every council member had to make their own decision. I would have liked the affordable only approach, but again, if you think back when there wasn't a lot happening in Tacoma, we've had our ups and downs. The whole history of Tacoma, I mean, if you go back all the way to the start, it's been when recessions have come, buildings have stopped construction midway through and so forth. So this was seen as a positive to keep growing Tacoma. Yes.
Hi, and maybe this might be a question for Brian as well. So with home in Tacoma having passed, and we now have more bonus units that can go into, for example, I'm in UR2. So if my house disappears, they can build a 12-unit apartment building. And that apartment building also receive a multifamily tax exemption if it has affordable number of units to it.
No.
Yeah. So that's not being applied to UR2, UR1?
Only UR3.
Only UR3. Thank you.
Okay, she was asking about home in Tacoma. There'll be more about that in a minute, but that not everything under home in Tacoma qualifies for this tax exemption. It has to be in those designated areas that were selected. But it is true that there will be, if the plan works, there will be more fourplexes and even larger in many places, many accessory dwelling units where it used to be a garage or whatever. And again, to whoever's listening from the council or planning, parking, really think about the parking. It changes your life. I'm in a group that was gonna hold a Christmas party at somebody's house. I've held it at my house before. It will never be held at my house again because the people would be parking 2-3 blocks away. So that's just an editorial comment. Okay, who did you say was next? Okay,
Yeah, let's keep the question short. We'll stop at 7.
yeah, that's.
Yeah, just, real quick, Mike, in answer to the question of how many houses, it varies depending on how you look at, there's a chart on the city's website. I calculated, I talked to Debbie Bingham about this. It's around, I think, about 160 beneficiaries of multifamily tax exemption.
Okay, he's saying that the answer to the earlier question is about 160 currently active beneficiaries to this exemption.
They are either under construction or already, using up their years.
Okay,
And then I was just gonna mention to everybody, because I looked at this a little bit too, so I'm kind of making a statement. Proctor Station, it's actually valued by the assessor at a little bit over $52 million. It's taxed at about $7.7 million. So it works out, and they stated this on April 9th when it came before the city council again, that they were gonna get a benefit of $575,000 per year for 12 years. That's $6.9 million, so you know. And it comes out, and Mike has nothing to do with this, so I'm not blaming you, Mike. It comes out that the cut in affordable rates for units is $17,000 a month, but the benefit to the tax rate person is $47,000 a month. So they clear $30,000 a month. So I'll be taking that up more with John and the rest of the city council. Just wanted to. There's a huge difference whether we're really getting a benefit or not. I don't think we are. One final thing, if I could say this, is on affordable. I've always struggled with that term because it's like, are you talking to me or Bill Gates? Affordable is a big difference. And I found out in HB 1110, which is the multifamily tax, that they have a definition of affordable there, which the city of Tacoma doesn't use. But affordable is 60% of the area median income, and that includes, 30% includes all your utilities. So we've been using it with the tax at 80%, at 70%, but it really should be like Seattle, 60%. And what that means is the more people are spending more would pay the balance.
Okay, but here's another couple of questions. This one here, next.
So I live 2 blocks from you and know full well the problem with parking. And since Proctor Flats came in after Madison 25 and the other one, whoever thought people would be using bicycles? Where did that decision ever come from?
it's much the same, of course, with transit. I mean, we waited for years for Sound Transit to finish the thing that goes from Stadium up to MLK. I go there fairly often. I go to Kaiser, for health purposes. The most I've seen on any of those trains is 4 people. One of them's a security guard. And I'm not counting the driver, but maybe it will come. Again, transit works some places. Seattle, I heard, I don't know all the reasons, but they are talking about closing down the South Lake Union transit, which is not Sound Transit, but if you build it and they will come isn't always true. If you build bike lanes, will they come? I don't know.
So it was just projection, just
It
hoping.
was a way, I think, to meet the requirements and to answer the lawsuit that was brought by the neighborhood and say, oh, we are we're expecting people to ride bicycles or walk, and there's nearby transit, which if you know that right now, currently, I was once the chair of Pierce Transit, so I know a little about this. The funds that are left over basically after Sound Transit for Pierce Transit are not enough to run frequently enough to have people use it in large numbers, and so they said, we're just a block and a half from a bus stop, but if the bus isn't running every hour, infrequently and not around the clock. Not so good. And of course, the other challenge we have, when I talk about parking, is the tremendous growth in something that has caught on, which is delivery of products to your home. So Amazon and the many others. I had one very nice Amazon guy come and knock on my door, and he said, I have numerous deliveries to make here on this block. Can I block your driveway? And I said, well, I'm leaving for work in about 10 minutes, so no. And also on principle, no, because it's against the law to block driveways. He said, well, I don't have to pay the tickets. The company pays the ticket. So anyway, that's not gonna get less, that's gonna get more, and actually, blocking the streets just to make deliveries. So, I can't say why they let them get by with the 95 bicycle racks.
One thing I've not heard yet is about the federal disability law where 1 out of every 6 parking places has to be for disabled people. I know across the street from Safeway, these people are parking all night in the disabled parking. So those of us trying to go shopping never had the disabled parking places. But my whole point is if you are going to be making parking lots or under the building parking or whatever, we still have to follow that federal disability law.
That's an interesting question. Of the 45 spaces underneath this building, I know 5 of them are for electric vehicles and 5 are for very small compacts, just because of the way it worked out. So I don't know that they have disabled spaces there, and it's private parking, not public parking, but I don't know if that makes a difference.
It does make a difference. Everywhere where there's parking, it has to be that way.
I think another question real quick.
Okay.
Can you just spend a minute and discuss again you mentioned enforcement, who's watching these developers to see how long they actually maintain a legal rent? How's that happening?
I do have a personal experience where I know it's difficult. When I ran the Tacoma Rescue Mission, we had 2 very low income apartment buildings downtown, and one was built with a partnership that paid for helping build the building with a federal tax credit. And what they did every year, the IRS would pick, I think they picked 6 units out of the 44 units in the building. And they said, okay, now show us the paperwork on these. The signed statement from an employer or from Social Security or whoever the source of income was, that this is how much they make. So you never knew which ones they were gonna pick. So you had to try to keep up with all of them. And I believe it becomes the city's responsibility to monitor that. And John is saying, yes, you're right. Okay. Well, let's just take a moment of personal privilege here and say it's been a wonderful 12 years. Nobody loves the tax man, but we've tried to make it better, easier, clearer, better explanation. If you haven't looked at our website, there's a whole lot of good stuff on there. And the other thing I should mention, anybody who is of below $64,000 income and is over 61 years old, you should look into that tax exemption, because they just recently increased that from 46,000 to 64. It may have opened the door for somebody you know.
A round of applause. Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you for your years of service for us. That was a great presentation. I think a lot of us learned some things that perhaps we didn't want to learn. A year ago, we had some similar sort of thought within the North End about what was happening with home in Tacoma. We actually got together a group and had like a round table that came up with our letters and comments. And I've got a feeling that perhaps this is another issue we'll discuss at next week's board meeting, that we may be coming back on an ongoing basis where we actually believe that we as a neighborhood council should get involved in this, because this obviously does have an impact. Anyway, that being said, I'd like to introduce our next 2 presenters, and we've got Devin, if you want to load it up. So those on Zoom, we are loading up a presentation, and we're going to check that you can see it at home. But I'd like to welcome Alyssa and Brian. And they're going to give us an update on Home in Tacoma, which is now
That's been adopted.
adopted.
You'll have to share the microphone.
Yes.
Brian, do you want to introduce?
Nothing on the screen yet.
I know.
Oh, hi. While the presentation comes up, so my name is Brian Uday and I manage the city's long range planning division. And Alyssa Torres works in my group, and you all may remember Elliot Barnett, who was working on Home in Tacoma for many years. He left the city about 4 or 5 months ago now.
Yeah.
Moved out of, was it June? Okay, moved out of the country, so left Alyssa and I to work to get Home in Tacoma over the finish line, which, as the deputy mayor mentioned, actually just happened here a couple of weeks ago on November 19th. So I will apologize because we're sort of in the recovery stage right now after many months of pretty hectic work getting this through the city council's process, going through the public hearing and all the public outreach process, and working with the council on final adoption and whatever amendments that they ultimately wanted to do. So this is the first time we've been out actually post-adoption, I guess. And so you're probably getting the first version of what maybe will have to turn into a bit of a roadshow to let everybody know exactly what the final answer was that the council adopted.
It's coming, I promise.
So I'll just start with, I know there was a lot of public involvement. The North Neighborhood Council was hugely involved and many community members involved over what, as was mentioned, was really a 5-year process that got to council's adoption a couple of weeks ago. The first couple of years was policy conversation, what was called phase 1, if you were part of that. You see myself, I don't get to make my ugly comment too, so. And then phase 2, which was the implementation of the policy direction that council adopted in phase 1, is what we just came to conclusion here a couple of weeks ago. So this was the implementation of the actual zoning. So the policies were done in phase 1, and this is the phase that actually changes the zoning on the ground. That changes what can be built where, what the standards are associated with it. And as most folks are probably aware, Home in Tacoma does reflect a very substantial change to the city of Tacoma's residential zoning standards. So for about 70 years, since the 50s, about half of the city was dedicated to exclusive single-family zoning. And a few years ago, the council adopted a new growth strategy that basically said we need to shift away from that exclusive single-family zoning and allow more diversity of housing types in our residential neighborhoods. Yeah. So we'll talk about the package overview. We'll talk about some of the materials. There's a lot of information available online. We'll give you some info about that, and there's going to be more stuff coming, like I say, over the next couple of months as we're producing summaries and useful information. And then we'll talk a little bit about implementation and tracking. One of the things that I will say at the beginning and we will repeat at the end is, like I say, this is kind of our first time out, and we are over the next couple of months, because this really launches February 1st is the effective date, is what kind of information would be really useful for community members to help understand what exactly is Home in Tacoma. Now that we've got this big 300 page code, what exactly does that mean for you? What can you expect to happen in your community? If you're interested in developing something, what information is useful for you? If you're concerned about what might happen, what information is useful for you? So, because that's part of what we're doing over the next couple of months, is putting that kind of stuff together. So we'll just go really quickly through the basics of what Home in Tacoma is. My guess is most folks have a decent understanding and have probably been involved in some of these conversations, like I say, over many years. Much of this, if you've been to previous presentations, is going to look really familiar, because the vast majority of what is Home in Tacoma is exactly as you would have seen it probably 6 months ago or 9 months ago. The council did make changes as part of the final adoption process. but that didn't really modify the underlying structure of what home in Tacoma is and the basic changes that it makes. So 3 new zones, it's the yellow stuff on here, it's the yellow and the orange is the 3 colors that are involved in home in Tacoma. So as you can see, it does take up a significant portion of the city. So these are 3 brand new zoning classifications. We used to have about 5 or 6 zones that were essentially single family zones or mostly single family. Those are being all replaced. So if you own property in one of those areas, the property is being rezoned as of February 1st of 2025. And it will either be UR1, UR2, or UR3. So those are urban residential is what the UR means. And there's a hierarchy there. The 1, 2, and 3, as you go up, it allows a little bit more stuff, a little bit more density, a little bit bigger buildings, those kinds of things. One of the big things that you'll probably hear through this is, and you already heard it mentioned about some of the state laws that have been adopted over the last few years. So one of the unique things since we started this discussion 5 years ago, the state stepped in a pretty dramatic way. And really said, not just Tacoma, but cities all over the state really need to move away from single family zoning and allow more diverse housing types. And so they essentially mandated some significant portions of what now is in home in Tacoma for us and for many other places. So the idea of allowing different housing types is mandated by the state, reducing parking requirements, mandated the state. I know Mike mentioned transit, the focus around transit, also mandated by the state. So you'll see that in a number of places. And one quick note, the map, it's obviously a big city map, hard to see, hard to figure out where you are on the map. There is an online version of that map that's interactive. If you haven't seen it yet, you can certainly go to the project webpage, cityoftacoma.org/home in Tacoma. And there's a bunch of information there. One of the links is to the interactive map. You can put in your address, it'll zoom directly into your address and tell you what the new zoning is for that area. Did we skip one?
Oh, do you want to? This one?
So this one, and I apologize if there's a lot of information on here, but it's kind of the best way we figured out to give you the core of what's allowed in home in Tacoma in one sort of shot. So the basic idea and what most folks have been hearing, which is accurate, is this part here. So depending on the zone you're in, it's where you might have been able to only have 1 house per lot. Now you get 4 units. Or if you're in the UR2, it's 6. It's kind of the starting. Or if you're in the UR3, it's 8. And then there's a bonus system that's incorporated in here, part of which is mandated by the state, part of which goes beyond what the state outlined, that basically gives you additional units if you provide some level of affordability. And there's a second level of bonus that is basically for nonprofits, that if they're going to do fully affordable projects, that's what the bonus level 2 is. It gets you even more units. You can see the height limits, floor area ratio is FAR. It's a tool used to sort of try to control the mass or just the raw size of buildings. So something we haven't had before, but is proposed as and adopted as part of this package to try to control a little bit the overall size of things. Then you see the setbacks. The height limits generally largely the same as what they are now. If you're in a residential zone, chances are your height limit's 35 feet. It will probably still be 35 feet. And the setbacks are going down a little bit from where they currently are. Just poke me if you want to add something. Housing types. So like I say, the core of this is really to allow for more diversity of housing in the residential neighborhoods. So you see these 5 house types here that are allowed in most of the zones. The one that's not allowed only in the UR3 is the multiplex. So that's a single building with 7 units. But basically 6 or less units, whether it's in a cottage style or a townhouse style or a backyard building like an accessory dwelling unit or houseplex, which is really a building with anywhere from 1 to 6 units, are allowed in all the zones. And the note there, really important, one of the most common questions that we always get is this saying single family housing is bad? Or it needs to go away, or will it get torn down? The answer is no, single family housing is still allowed. Single family housing can still be built, can stay forever, essentially. But there's other things that are also allowed. Parking. Parking. You're gonna love this. Basically, the parking requirements are going down, is the short answer to this. So, part of this is mandated by the state. The state said that we can't require parking, can't require any parking in areas that are close to major transit. Now, in the city of Tacoma, that's fairly limited, actually. The technical areas that qualify as major transit are the areas around the light rail. So the T line that's downtown, so that extends out kind of like this. This is downtown, sorry. Folks are not familiar with the map, we're up here. You know, this is Proctor, this is Brunswick. The transit line that runs down Pacific Avenue that Pierce Transit has recently launched, the enhanced bus service on Pacific Avenue qualifies. There's also the 2 parking rides at TCC and at Narrows, and also the transit station down in South Tacoma. So those are the areas that actually qualify. The state says you can't require parking within a half mile of those major transit facilities. Now, what the planning commission recommended and the council ultimately adopted went beyond that. In particular, along 6th Avenue. So the other 2, not good enough to qualify as major transit, but 2 of the best transit corridors inside the city and really Pierce Transit's service area, they also included. So that's this hatched area. So in the hatched area, what's called the reduced parking area, it is 0 parking. Beyond that, you see at the top of the slide on the left side, the parking requirements of 1 per unit, 3/4 per unit, and half per unit. Those are about a 50% reduction from what they were prior to home. And then obviously I'll make a note. One of the things that the council added towards the end was to conduct a study about 3 years out, particularly looking at 6th and 19th at these corridors where we're not required to have 0 parking, and see what the actual impact has been. How much parking are people building, even though there's no parking requirement, things like that. Affordability. So the goals of Home in Tacoma have been about housing choice and supply and affordability. So it's not only about affordability, but affordability is certainly an important component. Part of this effort is to achieve some level of affordability via supply, hopefully slow down what has been skyrocketing housing prices. But also there's some incentives built in to try to specifically encourage quote unquote affordable housing, which I know Kit mentioned a little bit earlier. Lots of interesting conversations about what is or is not affordable, but these are basically rent controlled units is essentially how it works, in the same way that the multifamily tax exemption has essentially results in rent controlled units. So I mentioned from the earlier slide, you saw the bonuses. So if you provide affordability, you can get more units. This breaks down what the affordability level is, how long for, it's for 50 years, which is quite long, very long compared to most of the other programs that are like 12 or 20. And it does layer, here's Jody's question. So the MFT only applies in UR3. Yeah, so one of the other things that the council did at the end and some of the amendments they made were specifically to try to incentivize ownership. So one of those is for accessory dwelling units. If you provide accessory dwelling units, you can get some bonuses. And if you provide owner occupied units, you can also get some bonuses. And that's tied to 150% median income level. And we'll be reviewing it 3 years on that one too.
Brian?
Yeah.
You said the multi-family tax exemption did not apply. You are one and you are two. Okay, so it applies to you on 3.
Yeah. No, yeah, right.
So yeah, just in the UR3. So when the council adopted, they modified the multifamily tax exemption program about a year ago. And one of the modifications they made was to say that when the UR3, the mid-scale, what was called the mid-scale, UR1, when the mid-scale gets adopted, the multifamily tax exemption would get extended to that area, so.
Right.
Yeah.
What is the fee in lieu? How does that work? That goes into the housing trust fund? Who pays
Yeah,
that?
so with the affordability bonus program, you can build them or you can pay for them. Essentially is what it means. So you can build it on site. So if you want to build a sixplex on your site, you can have those 2 extra units be affordable, or you can give the city money and it gives you the fee there, the in lieu fee. That you would give the city puts it in our housing trust fund, we go out and try to capitalize on that and maximize affordable housing projects.
One-time fee.
One-time fee, yes.
I have a question on the chat, sorry, Dawn. Just wondered, what happens if you're in a view sensitive area?
Can you repeat the question, Brian?
Yeah, the question was what happens in a view sensitive area? The home in Tacoma project didn't change the height limits in the view sensitive area at all. So if you're in we have 2 different versions. There's a 20-foot height limit area, 25-foot height limit area. Where it said 35, that'll just drop to 25 or 20, whatever the view sensitive controls in that case for height.
Wasn't it changed though at, by Point Weston? The UR1 was changed to a UR3 and that would change the height limit there, right? Or is that, there's a conflict there or what's going on?
Yeah, they did a few map changes at the end. That one, which is across the railroad tracks from Point Weston, didn't affect the view sensitive area though. So it was only in a portion of the property that's not view sensitive. But it did change the height limit.
I have a question. If you already have, what's it called, the courtyard kind of units, you already own that property and you have like 4 units in there and you want to upgrade or maybe add another one, is the city helping the property owners doing that?
What do you mean by helping?
Assisting with money to help update units they have or to add other units.
I mean, the city doesn't provide money in very many circumstances. Usually our money is tied to affordability. So the city does, through things like the Housing Trust Fund, provide resources to institutions, not just the Housing Authority and places like that, which is obvious, but other nonprofits that are out there. Habitat would be another good example, right? That the city does in some cases provide resources to, but those are generally for fully affordable projects.
If there's a place on 19th and Adams that have 4 units back in that area, and he's renting them mainly elderly to help them out and making them affordable, but it's also a cost to him to try to keep all that stuff up. So he was just wanted me to ask if there's anything that he can do.
Yeah, I mean, I would, anybody like that, I mean, I'd certainly recommend reaching out to the city's housing division, which is in our Community and Economic Development Department. They have a number of tools that may be available for something like that. Not my personal expertise, I apologize.
Was there one more, the question in the back? Yeah, do you
Well,
know?
I can't hear what they're saying, so.
Oh, repeating the questions there.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that.
That.
Sure.
Okay.
Trees, so this was one of the biggest conversations as part of Home in Tacoma. Whereas some significant portions of what is in the density allowances and the use types and all those is now mandated by state law. Trees is not mandated by state law. So this is a place where the city also went above and beyond on some of the density stuff. They also went above and beyond on the trees. So we have generally not required trees as part of residential development anywhere in the city. So certainly the council, as part of the final amendment process, did modify the tree requirements to some extent, added some flexibilities, reduced the numbers. If you were watching before, these numbers were 35, 30, and 25 2 months ago. So they came down a little bit. You see notes on here about you can plant trees to meet the credit requirements. You can plant trees, retain trees, pay fees in part. Another situation where Not completely, you have to provide at least 10% of the floor that's allowed there, but you can basically buy down flexibility on your tree requirement by providing mitigation fees to the city that the city would then use to go out and plant and maintain trees. See, there's flexibility to plant trees off-site, and plant them on-site and off-site. That might be on the next slide. There's retention of existing trees. Now, this is something that originally there were requirements around tree retention. This converted mostly to incentives. So we give extra credit if you're retaining existing trees. The one exception is for the largest trees. There was an amendment made by council that added some protections in for really large trees. That's 2 foot in diameter. That's a big tree. So for those ones, you really have to justify that the tree's in the way before you get the ability to cut down the tree. But you're gonna have tree requirements basically for all new development in residential areas. But there is a decent amount of flexibility. You can see here about using the fees. This was another debate that happened, was how far away from the project site can you use the mitigation fees? The council decided it needed to be in the same watershed. So some people were talking about a block or 2 blocks and things like that. Watershed, there's I think 9 watersheds in the city. So it'll be in the same general area, but not necessarily, right down the street.
Brian, they say you're fading in and out. I'm not sure why.
Fading,
Yeah, maybe it's like a microphone, just,
closer.
there you go. Thank you.
Okay,
Other question?
yeah.
Question, are these tree retention requirements only for new developments, or do they apply to trees that are existing people already they're not building any?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the deputy mayor mentioned this a little bit earlier, and there was some prior conversation about the portion of this conversation got separated off and will happen distinct from home to Tacoma. So the original conversation that was happening through the planning commission process basically said that tree retention was a requirement and that it was going to apply to new development and to places that weren't doing any development, just any existing tree in the residential areas. What the council decided was to split those two, that home in Tacoma was really a conversation about housing and about new development and how to regulate new development to ensure that it reasonably fits in with neighborhoods. The conversation about tree retention is really a citywide, or what they felt like needs to be a citywide conversation. I think as he mentioned earlier, it's not just in residential areas where we have big trees, where we're worried about trees coming down. And so that would be the tree preservation broadly as part of just non-development will happen as a separate conversation that'll start up this next year. Unit lot subdivision, this one gets a little technical, but basically it's just another method to divide property. One of the things that the city, the commission, the planning commission and the council heard really throughout the process was to try to find ways to remove barriers to ownership opportunities. There was a lot of concern that much of what was going to come out of home in Tacoma was going to be rentals only. And there's a real interest and desire to support ownership, not only just for existing residents, but sort of the long-term benefits of ownership, the multi-generational wealth that comes out of that, the stability that comes out of home ownership. And so one of the ways that the code's been modified to allow that is this unit lot subdivision tool. So it's kind of like a condo is effectively how it works, of a different name. So you've been able to condominiumize properties for a long time, and that happens through the state, not really through the city. This will allow you to create, if you have, like in the circumstance, townhouses, like there's 4 townhouses here, you'll be able to create property lines between them, basically on the wall between the townhouses, right? And each one on the lot. And the key to that is to say, not every single lot has to meet every standard, but the project as a whole has to meet all of the standards. So the tree requirements, the parking requirements, the design requirements, all those things need to be met for the project as a whole, while you can still allow for the division. That's right, there was something red there, so that's always the exciting new stuff, right? Yeah, that one's not too big of a deal. It really was just, if you're gonna create something like this, you're gonna have a shared water line or a shared sewer line or something. There's gonna be shared stuff on a project like that, the garbage pickup, whatever, right? And so there'll have to be a creation of a homeowners association or some sort of a structure like that to really facilitate the sharing of those kinds of things. Let's see, and then a couple of other things that, the planning commission recommended, I'll just make note of, and a few of these are in the code, the non-residential uses. So this is a expansion on the home occupations that are currently allowed, so give a little bit more flexibility to home occupations. And there's also some additional flexibility in the UR3 zone for some small neighborhood commercial uses. A lot of talk about infrastructure planning, system improvements, obviously with budget conversations going on. Right now, there's plenty of discussion about this overall in the city. There's really strong recommendations in here about looking for measures to be more proactive in both the planning and funding of those kinds of things. You see impact fees on there. It's one of the things definitely the city council has been looking at. Strong recommendations about urban forestry program that will at some level play over into this broader conversation that the city council separated off. Part of the reason they separated off as well, because there really needs to be a big discussion about how the city funds urban forestry program and make sure that we don't just create expectations without having any of the resources to back them up. The monitoring, I've talked about a couple times, and permitting support and training. So that gets back, I guess, to my original question about things that you all think would be useful. We're talking to permitting users, obviously, about how they can get the information they need, but we also want to hear from community members.
Do you want me to take this one?
Sure.
Cool. So I'll hop in here really quickly. Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you again. My name is Elizabeth Torres. I'm a senior planner in the city of Tacoma. Fun to be back. I know it's been a while. So I want to talk a little bit about the materials that are available, as Brian mentioned, since we just got this adopted with council. We're working on updating a lot of the materials and communications items to let folks know, where things landed with council, what has been adopted, and how to navigate the new rules. So we're in the process of updating a lot of the materials we had prior and then creating new stuff that's going to be helpful for folks as they, as we get used to this big change. So right now, if you're familiar, how many of you have been to the Home in Tacoma project website? Yes, keep going there because we're continuing to update that with additional material. So there you'll find the interactive zoning map that Brian mentioned. So that has been updated with all of the changes that council made. So you can go and look at your zoning. I know some folks have already started to look at what zone they're in. I'm in Road 2 over in Lincoln. So that's there. So that's updated and accurate. We also have the final ordinance that council adopted with all the code revisions that are there. If you want to nerd out with some code, you can do that. You can also see the amendment overview sheets. You can track all the amendments that were made by city council, see kind of what they were proposing and how that ended up, if it was voted to be adopted or not. As well as an updated executive summary document. So it's this one that you see here on your left. So it's just a real high overview on kind of what we're doing tonight, where we landed, what the most updated Home in Tacoma information is, and then we'll be working on updating those topic-based summary sheets that I think we've shared over the last year or so, that has one specifically for parking, specifically for trees and landscaping. There's like 6 of those that we're working on updating to get out to the community as well. And then we also have this document here, the development and design standards, which is more detailed. So if you're looking to develop or you're looking at what it says in the code, it's a just more accessible document to kind of see what the code says and what those very specific requirements are for development. So those are currently on the website, so check those out. And then we're again working on updating some summary sheets, we're working on some tip sheets, updating some FAQs. So I've been writing down the questions that you all are asking so that we can make sure that we have responses to those on the website. Those are frequently asked things that are going to continue to come up. And then, just, yeah, again, figuring out what is it that you all think is gonna be the most useful as we continue to communicate this, over the next couple of months and get ready for that implementation date of February 1st. And that takes me to the next step, so implementation. So, as we mentioned, this goes into effect February 1st of 2025. So it gives us a couple of months to, work in the back end, make sure that we have materials ready, that our staff is trained up. So we're having, several internal staff trainings to make sure that our permitting desk and everyone knows, what's in the code and can answer questions. Making sure that we have materials ready and where all those communications are ready. We have currently a pre-app process that has just kicked off today, the first day of it. So if folks have a project that they want to start working on under Home in Tacoma, they can put a pre-app in from between now and January 31st of next year. And that will allow us and the permit review team to kind of give some review to those plans, those early plans, give some feedback, see if there's any adjustments to make sure that it meets the Home in Tacoma requirements and to make sure that you're ready to go when that February 1st hits. So we're trying to give some extra support to some folks who are looking for the development. And we're looking for other ways that we can do that as well. And then tracking, I know that was one thing that we wanted to talk about too. Peter mentioned how we're going to be tracking. So it's come up through some of your questions and some of the things that we've been talking about tonight is making sure that we're, tracking what Home in Tacoma is bringing and how we can adjust it over the next couple of years. So we'll be tracking through our permit process is just how many units are coming on, what housing types, parking and trees and stuff, so that we can say, these are the impacts that it's had. How can we adjust it over the coming years to make sure that it's working the best it can. So that's where we're at right now. I think that's it for the formal part of the presentation. There's our contact information. If you don't know how to contact us, I have cards if you need them, but then we'll have a Q&A.
No, I can go ahead.
Can I start? So what's the permit approval? If you've got these booklets, if you meet those, is there any historic neighborhood compliance or color scheme? If somebody's going to do something that's out of keeping with that neighborhood, is there an appeal process for the neighbors?
The short answer is most of the times no. So if you're in a historic district, the historic district rules still apply. New projects generally go through design review process through the Landmarks Preservation Commission. But outside of that, if you're complying with all the regulations in the same way that if you wanted to build a garage behind your house today, your neighbor wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to object to it. That's going to happen largely with these two. And I think your point is real, that what we're talking about here is significant change. There is no doubt about that these new structures are going to be bigger and they're going to have less parking, and all of those things are real in what the policy decisions that were made. But no, there's no specific appeal process, generally just getting a building permit. Yeah, so homeowners associations are private, and so the city doesn't really have any role in or oversight over private covenants. And so if you have private covenants that say you can't do this, or you can't do that, or they have to be orange, or whatever kinds of private covenants that people can have, the city doesn't really have a role in that.
The city seems to consider that the people who live in apartments and all Home in Tacoma are chipmunks, that they never need to go out into a park. What's the city's plan for developing more park space? Parks need land. I don't see it.
So the question was about more parks, and the requirements that are part of the new development do include trees and some level of amenity space, but they don't include any specific additional resources for parks. Obviously, new development equals new tax money, which will help Metro Parks through the property tax collection process, but there isn't a specific, like, if you're building a fourplex, you have to put a park down the street or anything like that.
I have a comment, I just wanted to be aware, because I think it's great, you have training for your staff and all that, please get ready. I live in UR3, and I want to not exaggerate, so let's just say at least 3 to 4 calls a week for somebody offering to buy my house. 3 to 4 calls a week. And that is and I have a 6,000 square foot property right on the edge of the UR3. So I think it's gonna be crazy town, just to be honest, but be prepared. I don't know if you've already got a lot of contingency, what if kind of scenarios in the background, but I would highly suggest you get them. Because I think it's gonna be really crazy for a while.
Yeah, we definitely expect there to be some pent up demand. She was mentioning she's getting lots of calls to buy her property and seemingly from developers who want to build stuff on it. Yeah, we're doing a sort of a soft launch on the development side where we have actually started December 1st. Where we're allowing for pre-application process, so developers can come in and basically say, here's what I'm thinking about doing. And even though the code's not in place yet, can start working with staff to try to figure out how those standards apply to the site. A lot of this also is, I mean, the zoning is one portion of this, but to be honest with you, a huge part of the complication is simply the infrastructure necessary on the site. Because as you're putting more stuff on a property, it does start getting a lot trickier to put in the water lines and the sewer lines, and they have to be this far from those, and the garbage pickup, all these things get pretty complicated. So there's gonna be a lot of conversations about just the simple functionality of sites as they get denser.
So what happens now that we have the UR 1, 2, and 3? Does that zoning supersede anything else that was a part of the comprehensive plan? I'm going to use the example of corridors of Main Street. So on North Union, between North 21st Street and North 26th Street, that has been designated as a Main Street corridor, which means you can do residential, but also retail. Versus UR2 just has a UR2 only residential. So we had already submitted this per Elliott Burnett's suggestion back on March 8th to the Planning Commission. I forwarded onto Elisa. I have not heard anything back. So what do we do when there is a conflict between home and Tacoma and the comprehensive plan?
So I'll say, the easy answer to that is the zoning controls. So the comprehensive plan is a policy document. The zoning is what what actually operates on the ground and tells you what you can or cannot do. I'll note the Main Street designation you're referring to doesn't necessarily allow for commercial activity. That Main Street designation, which is in our transportation plan, doesn't translate necessarily over into what you might be thinking of as a main street. It's designated as a more important corridor. And I would say that the city is going through, as you may know, an update to our comprehensive plan as well right now. Not necessarily changing these residential portions because we're obviously just finishing that. But the transportation and mobility plan is one of the things being updated. And so as we get to the public hearing process for that, certainly would suggest that if you don't like that designation on that portion of the corridor, that's the right place to have that change be made.
So is that something that we would approach the transportation department and ask them to review that out of, I don't even see it in the master plan, but it is underneath still the plum plan.
Yeah, so I mean, you can send those comments into the planning commission at any point. I mean, they have oversight right now over the comprehensive plan update process. So, yeah, and we're aware of it because you've mentioned it multiple times. So.
You submit it into the planning commission, even though we already did it, but resubmit it to them.
I would say it's a good idea.
I'll follow up with you on that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Are there any plans, but like they did by stadium, supposedly for the high school students who never ride the rails? Are there any plans for these rails to be put in like for Union, Proctor, Stevens, North 21st, North, 6th Avenue?
Just expansion.
Yeah, because it's so hard to drive on those things to begin with. And like I said before, the city council, many of my neighbors don't even work in Tacoma, let alone use public transit. So what are the plans for that other than buses?
So as part of that comprehensive plan update that I mentioned, the city is having a discussion about enhanced transit service and where the city would prioritize those enhancements to be made. I would say if you're talking about streetcars on Union and some of those other streets, not in my lifetime, to be honest with you. The first goal is probably enhanced bus service. I think as Mike mentioned, I mean, Pierce Transit has been struggling for many years now to keep up with service and has actually had areas removed from their taxing district more recently than anyone had it. So that has really hurt their funding. And so, yeah, transit is a challenge, but certainly buses are the first step. I mean, the Sound Transit is the one largely in Tacoma that has built those light rail lines. And they're currently planned out to 2041, I think is the current extension out to TCC, so.
Yeah, because it's interesting, because the one bus that all the students in the north end going to stadium using was number 13, and they stopped it. So, yeah, it's those kinds of things going on without letting us know.
CCNRs are exempt because of grandfathering, so a bunch of single-family homes can't get together, form our own CCRs and say, we're always gonna be single family and oust the zoning, is that correct?
So existing CCRs are generally exempt. The state did actually adopt, that's one of the many laws that they adopted over the last couple of years. They said that they can't be private covenants that prohibit this kind of development anymore. So new projects coming in can't adopt those.
Grandfather, and do you know the SEIS for 1,000 additional residential units at Point Russin? Do you know if that's passed or if that's finalized?
I'm not sure. I'd have to get back to them.
Yes, I see a lot of time and energy being spent on educating, getting stuff together to help us understand what home is. I wonder if there's any energy going on to try to define or predict unintended consequences. For example, what's the impact on the school system, what's the impact on the water system, et cetera, so that we can be prepared for those consequences. Is there any time being spent on that?
Yeah, so great question. The question was whether or not there's been any time spent on unintended consequences or examining those. So yeah, as part of the development of this whole project, the city did an environmental impact statement that looked at infrastructure and public services, impacts to air and animals and all those kinds of things. So you can certainly look at that. I will say at the end of the day, more density has positive and negative impacts. This is at some level all grounded in the idea that the city is the right place to grow. And assuming that the Puget Sound is going to continue to be popular, which it seems to be, people are going to keep coming here. And the Growth Management Act, which Mike mentioned earlier, from 35 years ago now, basically was the state mandating and saying that cities are the right place to grow. That if you're going to have impacts, it's better to concentrate them. You can maximize the positives. You can be more efficient with the way you provide services, parks and water services and all those other things. That doesn't mean there's no impacts. There certainly are. And the EIS recognizes that and talks about ways that the city can work on and help address those over time. That's where I talk about things like impact fees and other measures where the city can try to be more proactive on a lot of those issues. But the school district was involved in that. The water department was involved in that environmental review.
And that's available on our website, so you can read the full environmental
Yeah.
impact statement as well as some summaries, and we can,
I looked through that.
yeah.
What it doesn't say is, in 10 years' time, here's what we expect. What it says is potential impacts here and there and so on. But it doesn't make any specific suggestions that if this is fully implemented, in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, here's what we expect. In the school system, here's what we expect of the water department, et cetera. And I don't see that vision kind of any place.
Ryan, that brings us, and you had a line for it. Tacoma is just about the only jurisdiction that I know of that does not have impact fees for development.
Right.
And therefore, the infrastructure the gentleman is referring to, that's going to be improved now, is going to require tax increases on the existing residents. I could sum it up by asking you one question. What does Home of Tacoma do for the existing residents of Tacoma?
So the question is, what is Home of Tacoma do for the existing residents? I guess it gives you more flexibility on what you can do with your property and hopefully the ability to stay in your neighborhood over time as housing prices continue to go up. Yeah, impact fees is a real challenge. You're right, that most jurisdictions in the Puget Sound region certainly have impact fees, which try to deal with the temporal reality. You know, that when development happens, the impact fees kind of show up on day one or so. Whereas the taxes, you know, you do get the increase in taxes, but that takes time to really show up, and you can't build a school. You can bond for it, but that's a little trickier, so. Yeah, impact fees. Yeah, council's looking at impact fees. so.
Brian, did that, last minute amendment on Waterview Street down there above Point Ruston, did that pass with the city council?
Yes,
Did that go up to UR3 then? Is that what it did, or did it go to something more dense than that?
yeah, so the question was about the property along Waterview Street. That was, one of the council's amendments towards the end of the process. Yeah, UR3 was the zone that it went to.
And I had one other question. One of the ladies asked about, height, limitations, whether those change or not in view sensitive areas. Do the setbacks for front and rear, is that going to be maintained or changed under the home in Tacoma for view sensitive areas? Because that, I mean, that also affects views, you know, lateral views as well. So if somebody moves their house out and you're back now further back, you're going to be cut off part of your view. Is that changing or?
Yeah, so the question was about setbacks and view sensitive areas. Yeah, so the setbacks did go down in general across the board, and that does impact view sensitive areas as well. So just the height limit was the one thing that didn't get modified.
Do you have any say, you know, if your neighbor's gonna build out, then, you know, if that's gonna block in your view, can you have any input at all, or is it just what it is now?
The easy answer is no, just to be simple about it. Really, the opportunity that residents have in order to provide input on projects that are happening next to them is if that project is asking for something special. A variance, generally, right? So if they're asking for a variance to go above the height limit, or to go below what the setback requirement is, or something like that, not provide any trees, there would be a variance opportunity that would come with the public comment option.
And that's like being ETS. I just explained that on the line.
Okay. So, thank you very much, Brian. Thank you, Alyssa. Let's give them a. And as you mentioned, we've had Elliot here many, many times. And even though you got the proposal over the line, we would like to be seeing you on a regular basis. So I'll work with Alyssa to get you on the schedule for next year.
Yeah, thanks, everybody,
Thank you.
and happy holidays.
And for those on Zoom, I hope we did a little bit better this time. We're still trying to work on getting we obviously need a second microphone in the room. Going back to the agenda, on old business, I don't have anything on the Amici House. We're waiting for some feedback. I think both the neighbors and the developer have appealed and there is not, as I understand it, there is no ruling back on that. Do you have anything on that, Brian, or not?
I don't know specifically.
No, okay. The historic district moratorium, the hearing did occur. We're waiting for feedback on what the result of that will be. I have nothing further to report on the Lowell Elementary School, apart from the fact that as I walk by it every day, they've got the fencing ready to start taking it down. And last month we had the presentation on the Cushman and Adams outreach. The board had a debrief after that meeting, and we are writing a letter to the council. We have some concerns that perhaps the proposals that will be coming out of that effort may not reflect what the feedback has been. So you'll get more on that. Are there any items of new business? I would say although on our meeting agenda, we talk about the January still be determined, we have invited the city to come and explain the budget, as you've been probably hearing and reading about the problems that the city are having with their budget. So they have agreed to come and talk to us. So perhaps we'll hear something from the council on that. And we've also reached out to some of our sister organizations, other neighborhood councils, to come in and join perhaps a discussion over what is different between different and the same. And before I close the meeting, I would just like to refer you, look on the back of your agenda. Some of you may not turn it over. We always have very good information there, and that is where you can get the contact information for reaching out both to your council members and to us. So if there's nothing else, I'll adjourn it. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we'll see you in January. Thank you.